Everything started on July 10, 1942, in New Hampshire. No one knew that this little boy, born Ronald James Dio, would one day shake the world. Growing up in a family of Italian descent, Ronnie began playing the trumpet at his father's request. It was in those moments that he learned the mathematics and discipline of music. Hours of trumpet exercises were actually laying the foundations of his famous breathing technique. Playing an instrument taught him that music wasn't just noise, but a craft. Although he loved playing baseball at a young age, his heart always beat with the rhythm of melodies. But no one could have guessed that a giant would emerge from this small boy. He would choose his stage name inspired by the famous mafia boss Ronnie Dio. He was preparing to become the godfather of music. Young Ronnie was actually discovering how to use his diaphragm while playing the trumpet. This would give him a power his rivals could never possess when he later picked up the microphone. He stepped into the world of rock and roll in the late 1950s with his first bands, the Vegas Kings and Ronnie the Red Caps. Everything was much simpler back then. He was at the piano, but his voice was slowly beginning to shine. By the mid-1960s, they continued their way under the name The Prophets. However, Ronnie's vision was much larger than local bars. He wanted to tell stories. He was burning with the desire to add fantasy, drama, and epic elements to music. These early works strengthened his vocal cords like a steel cable. Day by day, his voice was getting deeper, and he was beginning to find that characteristic predatory tone. Founded in 1967, the Electric Elves, later renamed simply Elf, began to make a name for themselves in the hard rock world. This group was the herald of the period when Dio's sound began to toughen. Ritchie Blackmore, the legendary guitarist of Deep Purple, was spellbound when he watched Elf. He especially noticed the raw material in this little giant's voice. Elf began to accompany Deep Purple on their tours. This was a great school for Ronnie. Huge stadiums, thousands of people, and being part of a professional team, Dio learned here not just to be a singer, but to be a master of the stage. However, Elf was only a beginning for him. When Ritchie Blackmore decided to form his own group, Rainbow, the first person he would take with him was clear: Ronnie James Dio. This partnership would launch one of the most epic periods in rock history. When Ritchie Blackmore and Ronnie James Dio came together, the music world witnessed a true storm. The 1975 album, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, gifted the world an anthem like Man on the Silver Mountain. Dio was no longer just singing. He was inviting the listener into a world of dragons, knights, and wizards. He proved his lyrical talent with works like Catch the Rainbow and 16th Century Greensleeves. But the real explosion would come with the Rising album. Think of the track Stargazer. That epic structure recorded with the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra was a masterpiece where Dio pushed the limits of his voice. However, Blackmore's controlling nature and desire to move the music in a more popular direction went against Dio's artistic soul. This major conflict would lead to a separation that would change the fate of the metal world. By 1979, the founders of heavy metal, Black Sabbath, were in total chaos. Ozzy Osbourne had left the band, and drug and alcohol problems had brought the group to the brink of collapse. For Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, it looked like the end of the road. No one believed that Ozzy's unique charisma and voice could be replaced. Black Sabbath was being referred to in the music press as a ghost of the past. While the band members were thinking about what to do in a hotel room, fate was weaving its web. Tony Iommi met Dio by chance in a bar. What would happen if Iommi's dark, heavy riffs combined with Dio's epic, melodic vocals? This question would turn into the riskiest but most brilliant move in rock history. The metal world held its breath, waiting for the new move from the Dark Children of Birmingham. When Dio joined Black Sabbath, fans were in shock. They asked, how can a small man fill Ozzy's place? But Ronnie's goal was not to fill Ozzy's place, but to carry Black Sabbath into a new era. In the first studio session, Tony Iommi played a riff, and Dio added that tremendous melody in just seconds. The band members looked at each other and realized at that moment, this man wasn't just singing, he was giving life to the song. Dio also took the songwriting burden from bassist Geezer Butler. He combined his own fantasy world with Sabbath's dark atmosphere. The resulting energy was so high that sparks were literally flying in the studio. They were now breaking away from their doom metal roots and transforming into a faster, more technical, and much more epic form of heavy metal. The Heaven and Hell album was on the way. The year 1980 was etched into music history in gold letters. When the Heaven and Hell album was released, it shook the foundations of the scene. The title track was like the first page of the holy book of heavy metal. That incredible tempo, starting with Neon Nights, proved to listeners that Black Sabbath was not dead, but rather had evolved. The album quickly went platinum and topped the charts. Critics described Dio's vocal performance as superhuman. The emotional transitions in Children of the Sea and the subsequent explosion were the pinnacle of Dio's technical mastery. With this album, Black Sabbath not only won back their old fans, but also made a brand new generation fall in love with heavy metal. Dio was now not just the band's soloist, but its savior. And what about that famous hand gesture, the sign everyone calls the devil horns? After Ozzy's famous peace sign, Dio had to find his own unique symbol. His Italian grandmother had taught him the Maloik gesture when he was young. This gesture was made in Mediterranean culture to ward off the evil eye. Dio brought this ancient movement to the stage. At that moment, thousands of people raised their hands at once, and a cult was born. Dio repeatedly said he never used this gesture for any satanic purpose, but merely to reflect the intense energy of metal and the spirit of the community. Today, from pop stars to rappers, the real father of this sign used by everyone is Ronnie James Dio. With one hand gesture, he managed to gather millions of people under a single flag. Following the success of Heaven and Hell, expectations were massive. In 1981, the Mob Rules album arrived. This album was in a darker, harder, and rawer tone. With epic works like The Sign of the Southern Cross, Dio pushed the boundaries of storytelling. With the addition of Vinny Appice on drums, the group had captured an even more aggressive sound. However, the balance within the band was beginning to change. Fame, tour fatigue, and ego clashes descended like a dark cloud over Black Sabbath. Although Mob Rules brought great success on tour, communication between band members was starting to break down. Dio felt he couldn't fully reflect his own vision. He didn't want to be a supporting actor. He wanted to be the lead in his own story. In 1982, during the mixing stage of the live album Live Evil, things fell apart. Allegedly, Dio and Vinny Appice were sneaking into the studio at night to turn up their own vocals and drums. Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler were very angry about this situation. In reality, this was just the last straw. Dio decided to leave the band. This was a second collapse for Black Sabbath, but a tremendous start for Dio. He rolled up his sleeves to form his own band. He took drummer Vinny Appice from Sabbath with him. Dio no longer had to answer to anyone. He would build his own kingdom and fight his own dragons. The metal world was beginning to hear the footsteps of a solo giant. The year 1983. On the Holy Diver album cover, a chained priest and a monster emerging from the sea. This visual alone was a legend. When the album was released, everyone realized that Dio didn't need Black Sabbath. Holy Diver, Rainbow in the Dark, Don't Talk to Strangers, each one became a classic. Dio blended the keyboard with heavy metal in such a way that the resulting melodic structure was never forgotten. Holy Diver was not just an album, but a manifesto of 80s metal. Dio was now a global icon. He designed his own stage shows and fought massive mechanical dragons on stage. His concerts were not just music, but a visual feast. With the freedom of having his own band, Dio took stage productions to crazy levels. On the Last in Line tour, there was a massive mechanical dragon on stage. Dio fought this monster with a sword in his hand. This was a theatrical level unseen in the rock world. The lyrics became even deeper. He spoke of social injustice, questioning faith, and themes of individual freedom under a cloak of fantasy. Dio was giving his fans the message, be the master of your own destiny. The album stormed the charts, and its music videos were in constant rotation on MTV. This man, 5'4" tall, transformed into a 30-foot giant on stage. His charisma was enough to hypnotize thousands of people. In 1985, the Sacred Heart album arrived. The production grew even larger, and lasers covered the stages. However, Dio's passion for metal began to clash with commercial concerns. Paths diverged with the band's guitarist, Vivian Campbell. Dio was always searching for perfection and had no intention of compromising. Towards the end of the 80s, he continued his path with the Dream Evil and Lock Up the Wolves albums. He never compromised on vocal quality. He supported young musicians, keeping the metal scene fresh by including them in his band. However, he was starting to miss those old, dark, and heavy Sabbath tones. Fate would once again cross his path with Tony Iommi. In 1992, while the world was being shaken by the grunge storm, Ronnie James Dio returned to Black Sabbath in a surprise move. The Dehumanizer album was the band's heaviest, most modern, and most technological album. Dio's voice was angrier and more powerful than ever. With tracks like TV Crimes and I, he raised his voice against the modern world. However, this reunion did not last long either. Dio, who rejected the offer to share the same stage with Ozzy Osbourne at a concert in Costa Mesa, left the band again. He would never accept being an opening act. His pride was always ahead of his career. He was a king, and kings do not stay in someone else's shadow. The 90s were tough for metal, but Dio never gave up. He experimented with more modern and dark sounds with the Strange Highways and Angry Machines albums. His fan base remained loyal to him because he never sold out his music to follow fashion. His stage energy, even in his 50s, put 20-year-olds to shame. At the end of every concert, he would sing until he was drenched in sweat, spend hours taking photos with his fans, doing the Maloik, and signing autographs. He had shattered the unreachable star image and built a real bond with his fans. His humility was as famous as the power of his voice. To be Dio was not just to sing well, but to be a good person. In 2000, Dio released Magica, one of the most ambitious projects of his career. This was literally a concept album. It even included a story narrated by Dio in the booklet. This album was his return to the world of fantasy. Critics praised the album to the skies. Even as Dio approached 60, he was still full of excitement to produce something new. His voice still maintained its clarity from those early days. He was planning Magica 2 and 3. However, fate had other plans for him. He would meet the members of Black Sabbath one more time, one last time, but this time not under the name Black Sabbath. In 2006, Dio, Iommi, Butler, and Appice came together again. However, to avoid confusion with the Ozzy-led Sabbath, they chose the name Heaven and Hell. This was much more than a reunion. They began to write new songs. The album, The Devil You Know, released in 2009, became one of the band's darkest and heaviest masterpieces. Dio was making heaven and earth tremble with his voice. That chilling intro and the subsequent devastating riffs in Bible Black reminded everyone who the true masters of metal were. This lineup was becoming giant on stage. No one predicted that this tremendous energy would come to an end. At the end of 2009, painful news arrived. Ronnie James Dio was diagnosed with stomach cancer. His fans were devastated, but he was still hopeful. He said, "I will beat cancer and get back on stage." He was thinking about music even during the treatment process. However, the illness progressed very quickly. On May 16, 2010, at 7:45 a.m., the greatest voice of heavy metal was sent off to eternity. The world was plunged into mourning. From Metallica to Iron Maiden, everyone spoke of how great an inspiration he was. That day, not just a singer died, the spirit of an era was pulled to the sky. But his legacy has grown larger every day since then. Go to any rock or metal concert today, and everyone raising their hand is sending a salute to Dio. He was the gentleman of metal. He defined the aesthetics of heavy metal with his stage costumes, his dragons, the Maloik sign, and his tremendous voice. Thousands of musicians, from Jack Black to James Hetfield, came from under his coat. He was the one who made Black Sabbath what it was, giving it that mystic and epic soul. Every time Dio's voice rises from the speakers, it reminds us of the importance of dreaming, resisting, and staying strong. He never died. He just went to fight dragons in another universe. In conclusion, my friends, Ronnie James Dio was a phenomenon beyond music. That 5'4" giant proved to us that the voice comes from the soul, not the physical dimension. With the revolution he made with Black Sabbath, the successes in his solo career, and his unshakable stance, he is the eternal king of metal music. His story is one of perseverance and passion. He said, "Long live rock and roll," and sealed this word with his life. You too, follow your dreams like him, defeat your own dragons, and never give up. Stay with Dio, stay with metal.